Well, hello and welcome to episode 4 in this series looking at the coastline of Durham, Tyne and Wear. Today we are in South Shields, which is literally on the south bank of the River Tyne at its estuary, and also situated on a peninsula jutting out into the North Sea. Before I go any further, I must apologise for breaking tradition in wearing a coat and not just my shirt. This is the end of February 2024, and I can tell you, although it's supposedly 7 degrees, the wind chill has got to be a minus number because it is absolutely perishing. So there's no way I can deliver this narrative in just my shirt, and I've got thermals on underneath this as well. But so I'm sorry for that, but there we go. Practicality is in charge of the day. So you may be wondering why I've skipped North Shields, as it has been mentioned in the previous episodes. Anyone living in the northeast, hearing the name North Shields, immediately thinks of the River Tyne and not necessarily the coast. And that is because North Shields is set slightly inland from the coast, whereas South Shields, although it occupies the opposite bank of the River Tyne, predominantly has a presence on the coast as well. So that is why South Shields is included as part of this series, and North Shields will be covered in the forthcoming series when we look at the River Tyne. As with many locations around Britain's coast, evidence of ancient Celtic settlements have been found here dating back as far as the Mesolithic Middle Stone Age. Stone Age arrowheads have been found, though no evidence of Mesolithic roundhouses. However, the post holes of a later Iron Age roundhouse were found beneath the Roman fort here, and that belonged to the people known as the Brigantes. The Brigantes were a loose collection of tribes scattered over Durham and North Yorkshire with Irish origins. The Tinea Fluvius, as it was called by the Romans, better known today as the River Tyne, was the northern boundary of the Brigante tribes, separating them from the Votadini tribes on the north side of the river, as well as the coastal region of Northumberland and southeast Scotland. And we've mentioned the Votadini tribes in the past series. I find it fascinating, though, that two Celtic tribes were situated so close together with only the river between them. The Romans came to Britain in 43 AD and arrived here in South Shields around 80 AD. They occupied the flat-topped high ground known as the Law, which overlooks the mouth of the River Tyne and the shoreline. It is almost certain that when the Romans arrived here, they would have found some sort of wooden fortified structure. The Brigantes people built very few forts, preferring small fortified crofts instead. When the Romans arrived, they established a port here, which was crucial for the landing of supplies, for their northern legions, especially so once the building of Hadrian's Wall began. As I've just said, and as we know from the last episode, the Votadini people occupying the north side of the river at this time, they befriended the Romans and viewed them as trading partners. Other tribes were not so accommodating. It is unclear whether the Brigantes befriended the Romans or opposed them, but over a period of 40 years across England, the Romans were repeatedly attacked by the indigenous tribes of the north. Between the years 119 AD and 121 AD, there was a major rebellion against the Romans, with several tribes gathering to form a larger, more potent force. It was this rebellion that prompted Hadrian, the Roman emperor, to instruct the building of the wall, later to be named after him. He chose to consolidate his empire, as the wall would not only allow border control at a cheaper price than a patrolling army, but also it would control immigration and border trade. As part of the huge building programme was the building of the fort of Arbea. The fort was built by cohorts of men from the 6th Legion. It controlled the mouth of the Tyne, provided a fortified port, and supplied the legions at the east end of the wall at Segedunum, today known as Wallsend. The name Arbea translates as the fort of the Arab troops. Arbea is the name of a region which lies between the rivers Tigris in modern-day Iraq and the Nisibis in Turkey. The Romans had drafted bargemen from the River Tigris into the Roman army as they were highly skilled boatmen. They were employed to operate all of the shipping up and down the River Tyne Fluvius and remained resident at Arbea until the Romans left Britain in 410 AD. The gatehouse of the fort was reconstructed in 1986 and the museum in the late 1950s. In the museum you will see the tombstone of an English woman called Regina. She was a slave to Barates, one of these Arab boatmen. Barates was from Palmyra in modern-day Syria, and she was from the Catervilloni tribe who hailed from modern-day Bedfordshire. She was granted her freedom and became his wife. She died at the age of 30, leaving her husband distraught. After the Romans left, of course, we enter into the era of the Anglo Saxons, who took over the fort at Arbea and named it Caer Urf, the Welsh Celtic word for fort. In the 7th century, King Edwin, later named Saint Edwin, was killed in the Battle of Hatfield Chase in 633 AD, and the mighty empire of Northumbria was split into its two former parts of Bernicia, north of the Tyne, and Deira, south of the Tyne. King Edwin's cousin, Osric I, was made king of Durham, and it is thought he made Caer Irth his royal residence, being the most fortified place in the kingdom of Durham at that time. His son became King Oswin in 644 AD, and he granted some of the land for the building of a monastery. The monastery was founded by St Hild of Whitby. She was an influential figure in early Christianity, her wisdom sought by many of England's kings at that time. Remember, of course, that England in that period had a king for every region. From the late 700s came the next era in British history, heralded by the start of the Viking raids. As we know, 793 AD saw the infamous attack on Lindisfarne Island, and in 865 AD the monastery here was raided and destroyed too. The Danish invaders established their own customs known as Danelaw and introduced their own language. A lot of the Geordie dialect originated from Danish and Norwegian words. For example, the word home in English is pronounced hjem in Geordie and spelt hjem in Danish. Out is pronounced ut in Geordie and spelt ut or ud in Danish or Norwegian. A child up here in Geordie land is a bairn, and in Norwegian it's a barn. Another word for a flea in Geordie is a lop, and in Scandinavian it is spelt lop, double P-E. You may have noticed the word hey on the back of the jackets worn by IKEA staff, another Geordie word for hi. So up here you may be greeted with hey man. Of course the word hi is now universal language worldwide, but it had its origins in Scandinavia with the invading Vikings. The exact site of St Hild's monastery is unknown today, and as far as I am aware, there are no visible remains above ground today. Bede writes that its location as being on the north bank of the River Wear, but as we learned from my last series, the Venerable Bede wasn't always accurate in his written accounts. It is more likely that the monastery would be on the south bank of the Tyne, near to the port. Though, to be fair to Bede, the land between the Wear and the Tyne is only 4 miles wide, so if the monastery was sited on the south edge of South Shields, he may have been not too far from the truth. In 1100 AD, the Normans re-established a religious centre here, as they did throughout England, and built the church dedicated to St Hild. This narrow 4-mile strip of land between the Tyne and the Wear rivers was referred to as Wirralshire in Anglo Saxon times, spelt Werhale. The Shields part of the town's name comes from the word shells. That's an Anglo-Saxon word for fishermen's huts or shelters, so the name South Shields means fishermen's shelters on the south of the river. The name of the town does not appear in any records until 1228, when it is recorded as the Shields upon the South. In 1296, the name changed to Shellis, then South Shellis by 1313, and Les Chelles in 1365. Bit of a Norman influence there, perhaps. When the name morphed into its present name of South Shields, I'm not quite sure. So if anyone can pinpoint that, please share that in the comments below. South Shields was properly established as a settlement in 1245, overseen by the Prior of Durham. The Prior of Tynemouth had developed North Shields as a trading base, and so the Prior of Durham did the same with South Shields. As we mentioned at Cullercoats in the last episode, the authorities at the port of Newcastle objected to this. Both towns being situated nearer the mouth of the river, they took the trade away from the port of Newcastle. The Newcastle commissioners petitioned King Edward I to stop both Shields towns operating as ports. The king ruled in favour of Newcastle, banning any loading or unloading of ships in either town. Gangs of merchants regularly raided both towns, destroying what they could in an attempt to expel the trade there. The battle between North and South Shields with Newcastle went on well into the 1600s. The whole tidal stretch of the town was regarded as the port of Tyne right up until 1848, when finally North and South Shields were recognised as separate ports. In the late 1490s, iron salt pans were built, starting a salt industry here. The original salt pans were situated near St Hills Church and numbered 9 in 1539. However, by 1663, that had dramatically increased to 121. By 1725, Lord Edward Harley, a Tory politician and peer, visited South Shields and declared it the largest salt-producing region in England. At the time of his visit, there were 200 salt pans. In 1644, Charles I was the English king. He was the son of James I, and he was the second Scottish king to rule Britain. He believed in the divine right of a king to rule as he pleased, which led to conflict with the English Parliament and ultimately to the English Civil War. The Geordies had always been loyal to the Crown and so sided with Charles. Oliver Cromwell led the parliamentary forces in England, and of course the Scots were only too keen to join for a chance to have a go at Northern England, and the Scottish forces were led by Alexander Leslie, Earl of Leven. Leslie set about capturing Newcastle and found that a little bit too difficult, but he did manage to take the fort at South Shields after a lengthy siege. The Royalist forces retreated south and were confronted at the Battle of Baldon Hill. The Battle of Boldon Hill in March 1644 took place using muskets and cannons on both sides, ending after one day with neither side able to claim an outright victory. The Royalists withdrew south, followed by Leslie's forces, only to face each other again at the Siege of York a month later in the April of 1644, and then again at the Battle of Marston Moor in the July of 1644, where finally the Royalists were defeated. Returning from York, Leslie again lay siege to Newcastle in the August of 1644, and by the October the city had surrendered to him. During the entire period from the Romans leaving in 410 AD and the late 1700s, South Shields hadn't developed very much and only consisted of a small chapel dedicated to St Hild and a long narrow row of cottages running parallel to the river. Large spoil heaps were scattered around the edges where the ballast from offloading visiting ships had been dumped. After Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries in 1539, the priors were also removed and replaced with Church of England bishops. In 1768, the Dean and Chapter of Durham Cathedral, the Reverend Samuel Dennis, obtained an Act of Parliament to develop some 8 acres of land belonging to the church. That's 32,374 square metres. The Dean was the cleric to the bishop, and the chapter were the group of canons assisting the bishop. The Dean had realised that South Shields needed to be developed to cope with the fast expanding number of trades springing up. He planned an extensive marketplace to be built with several new streets laid out in a grid pattern. At the centre of the marketplace, a small square town hall was built by the architect John Wooler. Today it is known as the Old Town Hall. The Edwardian Town Hall in the centre of the town today was built in 1905 by E. Fetch, a London architect. As we mentioned before, following the Civil War, salt production had dramatically increased. Then in 1650, the first glassworks opened here, and by the end of the century, glass and chemical manufacture, along with shipbuilding, had eclipsed salt and coal production. An alum works was established by John Cookson in 1720, manufacturing glue and sulphate of soda. It was reported that South Shields had the largest alkali works in the world at that time. Towards the end of the century, it was converted to glass manufacture, one of 8 glass works in South Shields, by 1827. The same year, 1720, saw Robert Wallace open the first shipyard in South Shields, fiercely opposed by the Newcastle authorities. After a legal challenge in the High Courts, Wallace won the right to build ships and had no further opposition. That opened the floodgates for others to set up, and by 1850 there were 14 shipyards along the south bank of the Tyne. As I mentioned earlier, coal was extracted from here around 1500 AD, but it was during the Victorian era where the coal production and exports reached its peak. The first mines here were called St Hilda's and Templetown, founded by Simon Temple, a member of a wealthy shipbuilding family. Templetown was a suburb of the quickly growing new town and named after him. From the mid-1800s, further collieries opened in West Harton, Bolden, Marsden, Whitburn and Westoe. With each new colliery and shipyard, new houses were built to accommodate the workforce, and steadily South Shields continued to expand to what it is today. It had a population of over 75,000 and was superseded in size only by Newcastle, Sunderland and Gateshead. Apart from the Edwardian Town Hall, many grand buildings were built reflecting the town's wealth. One of these grand buildings was the Customs House, built in 1848, which is today an arts centre hosting many theatre productions and live events. Apart from its industrial history, South Shields has a close connection to the sea. Once the piers had been constructed at the mouth of the river between 1854 and 1895, the beachscape and river mouth was changed. The plus side of it was the deposit of more sand on the shoreline, making South Shields attractive as a resort. The downside was the creation of dangerous sandbanks at the mouth of the river. In September of 1789, a ship called Adventure went aground in strong winds on one of these sandbanks. Everyone perished in the cold sea, with onlookers on the shore unable to help. Following that, a committee was formed to develop a lifeboat that could operate effectively in such shallow water and adverse conditions. 2 South Shields men rose to the challenge and both submitted designs for a lifeboat. One was a guy called William Woodhave, a simple parish clerk from St Hilda's Church, and the other a guy called Henry Greathead, a wealthy South Shields boat builder. Apparently both men claimed this lifeboat as their design. Henry, being of greater social standing and influence, was given the credit for the design. Although it was Henry who funded and built the boat, and not just this boat but several others that were distributed all along this coast, it was clearly recognised that the design was actually William's. Henry achieved generous remuneration for his efforts, where William received only a few pounds. How many times does that happen in today's world? A rather grand monument stands between the 2 marine parks here, not only in commemoration of Queen Victoria's Jubilee, but also to the invention of that first lifeboat. The memorial shows both men's names. Just next to it is a facsimile lifeboat from 1833 called Tyne. Just to the east of the Roman fort of Arbea, on Law Top, are 2 beacons called Law Top beacons. By lining these beacons up, ships were able to navigate safely through the sandbanks into the river mouth. You will recall we saw something similar to that when we visited Lindisfarne in the last series. As happened in many of these seafaring towns all along the northeast coast, the prospect of war with Napoleon saw press gangs forcing able seamen into the navy. One such raid took place here in 1803. The northeast was a main target for the gangs, as it was considered that there was enormous maritime skill among the sailors and fishermen here. During the First World War, Britain recruited a huge number of Yemeni men to serve on the British merchant ships around the Gulf of Aden. When the war finished, many of these men chose to settle in South Shields. A mosque and Yemeni school here in South Shields was visited by Muhammad Ali in 1977. Similarly, a community of Bangladeshi people also chose to settle here. In the First World War, South Shields saw a Zeppelin bombing raid, a very rare event on the northeast in the First World War. I think Hartlepool had a similar experience. On the foreshore of Littlehaven Beach is the remains of a ramp which was used to pull seaplanes out of the water into some temporary hangars for maintenance and repair. All that remains today are 2 rows of wooden posts. In the Second World War, of course, it came under heavy bombardment because of the shipyards on the Tyne, but then so did the rest of the industry along the Tyne during the Second World War. Both the North Pier at Tynemouth on the north side of the river and the South Pier here at South Shields have lighthouses on them. The South Pier lighthouse lost its dome roof during Storm Babette last year in 2023 and as yet has not been recovered. A more intriguing lighthouse is the one behind me that you can see over my shoulder there, and this here on my right hand side is called Herd's Groin, and this is just inside the 2 outer piers at the mouth of the river. The groin was constructed in 1861 to protect Littlehaven Beach, called Herd Beach back then, as the new piers had caused the river tides to erode the sand away. This hexagonal steel structure, sitting on 12 steel legs, was constructed by Trinity House in Newcastle. It's painted an ochre red and looks like something out of a 1940s sci-fi movie. Its purpose is to guide shipping through the tricky entrance to the river. As we mentioned when we were at Tynemouth, the river mouth has rocks just below the surface called Black Midden Rocks. Any ship approaching the mouth of the river from the sea on the correct course sees a white flashing light from the lighthouse. If it is off course to the north, the light appears green, and if the ship is off course to the south of the correct line, the light appears red. Moving on to the railways now, They first came to South Shields in 1839, linking Sunderland with Gateshead. Just as we have seen in other coastal towns, bringing city families to the seaside as well as improving transport for trade. In 1879, a new station was built at Mile End Road. Today, that site serves as a train depot for the Tyne and Wear Metro Light Railway. The new bus and metro interchange was built 200 metres south of that and opened in 1984 as part of the 5th phase of development. Many famous personalities have come from South Shields or been associated with it. Catherine Cookson was one such person, born in South Shields of course, a prolific novelist, many of her books being made into films and TV dramas. Her books were based on her own experiences growing up in South Shields. Sadly, she passed in 1998, aged 91. Other famous people from South Shields are Ridley Scott, the filmmaker, who produced Gladiator and Hannibal, just to name two of his many films. Perry Edwards and Jade Thirlwell, singers from the girl band Little Mix. John Barber, the inventor of the Barber jackets, sold worldwide nowadays. Eric Idle, one of the Monty Python comedians, known worldwide for the series Monty Python's Flying Circus. Not forgetting, of course, The Life of Brian and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. He is also known for the song "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." Pardon me, sorry about that. Dame Flora Robson, who starred in many films between 1930 and 1980. Another famous actor was John Woodvine, star of many TV shows such as When the Boat Comes In, Doctor Who, Coronation Street and Emmerdale. And more recently he appeared in the Netflix series of The Crown. Another famous personality is Joe McElderry, the 2009 winner of the X Factor. And of course you can't talk about South Shields and not mention Sarah Millican, the hilarious and controversial female comedienne. There are countless others from the world of politics, writers, artists, composers, sports personalities and military heroes, all born in South Shields. Today, South Shields is still popular with tourists and day trippers. Most come for the beaches at Littlehaven and Sandhaven, the seafront attractions and the parks. It has many fine hotels and eating places, both along the seafront but also in the town centre. An art gallery, museum and theatre all add to its many attributes. As well as the Tyne and Wear Metro, which links South Shields to Sunderland and Newcastle, it also has a ferry which links it to North Shields on the north bank of the river. Of course, South Shields today may be best known worldwide as the finishing post for the annual Great North Run. Well, that's the end of the narrative, so I'm going to leave you with some views of South Shields and I'll see you all in a few moments. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and that's the end of this 4th episode. As you can see, the sea is coming in rather fast, so that's just good timing for me to escape before I get drowned. And the rain doesn't start, typical British weather. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already done so. If you've got a spare bob or two, bung it my way, because it all helps to fund the productions. They don't get done for nothing, it all costs money. And every single penny of help I can get is superbly, gratefully received, honestly. Anyway, as I said, if you've enjoyed it, give it a like, support the channel in the usual ways, and I will see you all very soon in the next episode. Bye for now.